truth burns bright. We stand as one exposing your lies tonight. Tonight, no scam or false prophet can dim our light. Keep it unfiltered, let pride take flight.
Shut up, you dumb, you sound like a coon. Get out, stay clear of this room. We proud, we black, rich, and forever stay paid. They lies and chemists spraying from the soil they mislay. Their tales are sham, cooked up by scammers who toil. So shut up, chief X, you're a grifter, spoil. Your bohannon drivel and your soul. Coptic verse, their language is liturgical, not to rehearse curse. While Ethiopian and Nubian cops and Cairo so merciful. Drop true surgical, leaving your myths pitiful.
You act like black folks, they speaking Remy, give me your idiocy. Buds deep, can't study, can't even see me. Bubble brother, hush up, before I knock your sugar out. Don't twist our ancestors' lore, I'll butcher your clout.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one exposing your lies tonight. Tonight, no scam or false prophet can dim our light. Keep it unfiltered, let pride take flight.
You claim you came from Baltimore, just more trash on display. I bet the faithful flock was up, dusting your ass away. Into that fat orange cat, you're dumber than a box of rocks. Pushing assimilation is politics that shock like cheating mock.
We spot you for a mile, your act just isn't slick. This is real knowledge, not your chronological scholarship. If you scared, you should be watching as I spit. God's flame, no bars, no game. You're dumb when I put you to shame.
When your twisted lies crumble and your fake talk fades, our united voice echoes, truth never degrades. From the ashes of the sea, our spirit invades. In Kemet's name, your false crown forever cascades.
Rosie aka Amir, the scam's a total disgrace. Spitting away on one jargon at a crooked scheme and pace. You twist words confused, try to carve up a space. A fraud, your fake gospel body again with no base. You try to fool slow raps with your bogus empty guys, but your clumsy act crumbles under truth piercing eyes. Kemet stands united, no room for your deceitful art. Step aside, false prophet, your lies won't break a heart.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one exposing your lies tonight. Tonight, no scam or false prophet can dim our light. Keep it unfiltered, let pride take flight.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet, unfiltered, black pride takes flight.
Live in full effect in the building. Give me a 1 in the chat if you can hear me loud and clear. And we about to get started. We are about to get started. You might want to like share a window capture low key rather than share this. Shout out to everybody. I'm about to share a video about we about to go into, just this recent situation with Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens. And, we're going to get into just some of the misconceptions that they had, dealing with African history in general, and, just the fact that most of these black conservatives are tokens. They don't really have a internal ideology. They're not really conserving anything but their own place within the Western status quo. And we're about to break that down. We're about to break that down really, really smoothly. So, I'm just wait for a few more minutes for a few more people to hop on in before I get started. That's what's up. That is what's up. It's about to be a pretty lit expose. We're about to expose the frauds in the game. Really, most of these black conservatives, the reason why I would say that they are fraudulent is because they don't really touch the nature of the Bible as it relates to black people. Black people are not their target audience. Their target audience is white folk and, their white benefactors. That's really, what it boils down to. Their target audience are white folks and their white benefactors. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play a video, just dealing with some of the claims made by Candace in her interview with Nick Fuentes. And what you have to understand about Candace is a puppet. She's a grifter. Candace is a complete grifter. She is not someone who cares about the well-being of black people whatsoever. She does not give a damn about the well-being of black people. Shout out to Lee Clinton in the chat. Appreciate you for stepping on in. Appreciate you a lot for stepping on in. Finna get started once I can bring this up again. Finna get right on in. It's better if I have it like this. Finna get stuff situated. No capture. I'm gonna get this situated. I don't know if this is the one I'm looking for, but it may be. No, that's not it. That's not it. I'm trying to bring up the video. There it is. So lead, do me a favor, and anybody else who's listening in, just give me a 1 if you're able to hear this. If you're able to hear this video, give me a 1, and I'm gonna stop, in between and provide my commentary.
So you don't think that there's group differences on average between the races?
I think, just to be clear, I think there would be group differences if you took it, like we were talking about, an American versus somebody who graduates college in Europe. There'd be tremendous differences.
Not tremendous, but...
Yeah, so this is, appreciate you, Lead. So this is the first point, group differences on average. Yeah, there's differences on average with race, with respect to skin complexion, with respect to hair texture, even with respect to so-called intelligence. Now, intelligence is what Nick Fuentes, and Nick Fuentes is a homosexual. I wouldn't be surprised if he had really kinky fetishes behind the scenes. Some of the evidence about this has been released by journalists. So he is a homosexual who is struggling with internal issues, internal sexuality issues. But with respect to intelligence, individuals like him, because they have an inferiority complex in comparison to black men, maybe he's jealous of black men, in athletics. Maybe he's jealous of black men, some of the black fathers of the Catholic Church that both, Candace and Nick Fuentes attend. Now, personally, I don't think that Nick Fuentes is aware of the history of the Catholic Church, the history of the Christian church in general on the African continent. I don't believe he's aware of that. But he has an inferiority complex like many white nationalists do. So what he does to compensate for this is he deals with intelligence and the so-called differences, among the races with respect to intelligence. But we're going to get into later in the video how, most of that information is bunk. The bell curve has been completely refuted and trashed by most, scholars, conventional neurologists, people who study this type of stuff. But that's really what it boils down to. They want to articulate that European people are superior to African people with respect to intelligence, the particular type of intelligence that they define.
Yeah, there would be slight differences,
yeah.
but you don't
So
think
I
that
think
racially there's differences between races?
I think, yeah, because we have huge differences culturally. So going to your point of saying, I don't want to live in a black neighborhood, well, neither does LeBron James when he gets money, right?
Right.
And there's a reason for that, because there is something that's happening culturally in Black America that's been going on for a very long time. But that.
Yeah, see, that's a very lazy analysis by Candace. Candace, when she's dealing with, black culture. And before I give commentary, you know what? I'm going to play it. I'm going to start from the back, and I'm going to just play the whole thing through. And then I'm going to play it back again and provide some commentary.
So you don't think that there's group differences on average between the races?
I think, just to be clear, I think there would be group differences if you took it, like we were talking about, an American versus somebody who graduates college in Europe. There'd be tremendous differences.
Not tremendous, but yeah, there would be slight differences,
yeah.
but you don't
So
think
I
that
think
racially there's differences between races?
I think, yeah, because we have huge differences culturally. So going to your point of saying, I don't want to live in a black neighborhood, well, neither does LeBron James when he gets money, right?
Right.
And there's a reason for that, because there is something that's happening culturally in Black America that's been going on for a very long time. But that thing, I would argue, didn't exist in.
What about in Africa and Haiti? I mean, they're killing and eat each other in Africa and Haiti. Everywhere where they are, you have these problems.
Yeah, I'd like to look into, and I'm pleading ignorant, but I've heard some things about what happened in Haiti and what the Clinton Foundation did there. So I think I'd have to look more into the history of Haiti to be able to push back on that at all. I don't think I agree with that.
What about all of Africa then? There's not one country in sub-Saharan Africa that's successful. Not one. They're all least developed countries. They're all failed states.
This kind of reminds me, and we could kind of flesh out this conversation together, and I'm not perhaps ready to have it fully, but I do remember going back to Dave Smith where he was conceding a point on, well, all of these other Middle Eastern countries, no, you wouldn't want to live there. You'd want to live in Israel. In my mind, I'm going, well, because you just keep bombing the crap out of them if they ever try to get ahead. I remember watching this clip of him saying that, going, why don't these countries get ahead? And kind of going back in my mind to the Gaddafi speech where he's speaking essentially about, here's what we got to do in Libya to get ahead. Here's what we're going to do with the dollar, and we're going to be progressive and this and that. And they killed him. And then what happened to those Libyan refugees? Suddenly they're now pouring into, just like he said was going to happen, that they're now pouring into the European continent, and Europeans are complaining, who are these people? And so the question is, are we allowing, because I'm like, Africa's a pretty rich country. Like, why aren't Africans controlling the diamond trade? Who's taking all of the diamonds so that they can't control the diamond trade? And how long have these people been doing that, being essentially culture vultures? That's kind of the journey that I've been on now in terms of really trying to go back and look into history to see what's happened. And I never trust myself when I have a perspective now, because I realize how much of my opinions and beliefs were shaped by the public school system. And so I don't think you're right. I think that there has been a very sophisticated effort to, just like you would say now, in terms of people that are intentionally attacking Anglo-Saxons. I'm just learning about that there were these books that were written to, we must genocide the Anglo-Saxons, that were going on for a lot longer than I realized. History didn't begin with World War II, but I think it would take a lot of time to kind of unpack that.
Yeah.
Like, are we stopping people from getting ahead just because, I don't know?
That just sounds, I mean, being honest with you, that just sounds to me like a left-wing argument when they say, why don't these countries get ahead? Colonialism, you're a colonizer. It's like, okay, but when we got there, they had no development. When we got to Africa, they had no technological development.
So you think that
history.
Even if we weren't at war, and sure, you could say that you think that's a leftist argument. I would only push back on that because I've learned so much about just like recent history that I didn't know. But you think that the Middle East, like if we had done nothing in terms of the Middle East, that they would just be savages and just be like, America didn't do anything it doesn't set anything backwards, and you're just like bombing a place.
Yeah, kind of. I think that we did set them back because when they don't have political order, it prevents development and investment and things like that. But, again, when you look at the antecedents of all these, the history didn't start, like you said, with World War II in the 20th century. There's a reason that European civilization created this enormous gap between them and everybody else. And I don't think it was that it was white supremacy or it was unfair or something like that. I think it's because Europeans are smarter.
So that's the full video, and I'm gonna play it back again, just so y'all could hear it, just so y'all could get what he was saying. A lot of the weak pushback, Candace Owens is not intelligent enough to be able to push back against, the lies of Nicholas Fuentes. She's not able to push back. She doesn't really have the experience or the know-how. She said that she just learned about, the so-called imperialist impact on a lot of these countries across the planet. And, Nick Fuentes, he is speaking as a white person to Candace Owens, but even within the white nationalist space, you have the so-called pagans who don't get along with the so-called Christ cucks. And if you look at Europe, for the most part, was severely underdeveloped. In the 11th century, most Europeans lived in grass huts with sticks. They didn't have architecture. It was actually Southern Europeans, which, Nick Fuentes partially claims, I believe, being of Spaniard, if not Italian descent. Southern Europeans who borrowed architectural traditions from West Asia and Africa, who actually spread architectural traditions into the rest of the European continent. And we're going to get into that a little bit more, but I'm going to run that back, and we're going to respond to each step by step by step. And give me a like in the chat if you enjoy what you are seeing. Give me some support. Hit the Cash App or PayPal if you appreciate this show. We are just exposing how, ideologically, Candace Owens doesn't necessarily have the chops to be able to respond back and forth, to a grifter, an obvious homosexual kid in Nick Fuentes.
So you don't think that there's group differences on average between the races?
I think, just to be clear, I think there would be group differences if you took it, like we were talking about, an American versus somebody who graduates college in Europe. There'd be tremendous differences.
Not tremendous, but there would be slight differences,
yeah.
But you don't think that
think
racially there's differences between races?
I think, because we have huge differences culturally. So going to your point of saying, I don't want to live in a black neighborhood, well, neither does LeBron James when he.
Yeah, see, this is the first part of this that is really, really bad. So Candace, as a conservative, she doesn't have the ability to distinguish class, and she doesn't really make class arguments with her analysis unless it's convenient. See, both Candace and Nick Fuentes, when it comes to blaming Israel, when it comes to blaming Jewish people, all of a sudden the left-wing arguments come out, the left-wing arguments as they call it, but right-wingers, especially far right-wingers like Nick Fuentes, are keen on blaming absolutely everything that has to do all of the problems of white America, all of the problems of white Europeans. These are the fault of Israelis, Jews, so-called Zionists, right? They will blame everything on Israel. Every single problem that happened in white history, white so-called history, or in white culture and white civilization. White women are becoming feminist. That's the Jews. White people are becoming gay. That's the Jews. White women aren't having children. That's the Jews. White men can't find a job. That's the Jews. America's going to war. That's the Jews, right? And in some cases, Zionists do influence the foreign policy of America, right? There are some cases where they have influence, but white people, the same thing that they accuse black people of doing, the same thing that they accuse every single so-called racial and ethnic minority of doing in terms of blaming their problems on someone else, they do when it comes to Zionism and the Jews. It's a fact. And Nick Fuentes, he is one of this Ferry Fuentes. He's one of the worst people in this regard on the internet. It's as if they can take no accountability for their actions. And again, to the European pagans who laugh at people like Nick Fuentes, calling him a Christ cuck, he does all of this while worshiping a Jew. Blatant contradiction. Blatant contradiction. Let's continue.
It's money, right?
Right.
And there's a reason for that, because there is something that's happening culturally in Black America that's been going on for a very long time. But that thing, I would argue, didn't exist in.
What about in Africa and Haiti?
Well, so and before I jump on this, when she says LeBron James doesn't want to live in a black community, first of all, LeBron James is a billionaire. He is of the upper class. How many all black upper class communities are there in America, right? Now, again, you have slavery, you have Jim Crow, like legitimate things that happened, in history. These are things that, Nick Fuentes and Candace's church, the Catholic Church, apologized because Nicholas V, right, when he released Dum Diversis, basically legalizing the enslavement of African people by members of the church, when he did this set in motion the international degradation of the Ma'afa and the trafficking of human beings from the African continent into the New World, so-called New World, or the settler colonies that these Europeans were setting up, many of which white nationalist Wignats like Ferry Fuentes would blame on the Jews. But again, right, the Catholic Church, who apologized, for their role in the enslavement, has admitted this, that they literally gave the legal designation for members of the church to be able to trade heathens into slavery. So the long history of enslavement of Jim Crow, even with respect to that, you still have black men and women who have been able, by their own God-given talent, to become successful, despite all of the odds that were against them. And this is a testament to black intelligence. You see, IQ tests only measure a certain parcel of human intelligence, and most neurologists and most people who deal with the brain and human intelligence can be able to articulate this. The lack of intelligence testing within IQ tests, limited to linguistic intelligence, mathematical intelligence, and various logical intelligences as is defined by Europeans. But there's also kinesthetic intelligence that someone like Serena Williams or LeBron James would definitely have, which is body intelligence, right? Auditory intelligence. A lot of the great musicians, have this. Even if you were to look at some of the great inventions, Mark Dean, who created the bus system that IBM used for the personal computer, right? Eugene Russell, who literally created 2G technology, right? And the mobile cellular phone. And just the many different patents. Lewis Latimer, the carbon filament light bulb. The many different inventions that Ferry Fuentes and Candace would not be able to enjoy in the computer, in the internet, right? Emmett McHenry, who literally created the domain registry that we use for the internet. These are black men and women who created this technology that these fools are using today, as they claim black people are non-intelligent. So we're going to get into what Ferry Fuentes has to say about this. He's going to blame, he's going to try to point to other African nations, other majority black nations.
I mean, they're killing and eat each other in Africa and Haiti, everywhere where they are. You have these problems.
Yeah, I'd like.
And again, look, Haiti is one of the most important nations in the black world. Shout out to Neferkari Dessalines. Shout out to all the Zos out there, right? The white supremacists can never forgive the L they took in Haiti. Their greatest general, Napoleon, he lost. He took an L. The Haitians defeated them. They murked them. They kicked them out of the island. They banished them to Europe, and white supremacists can never, let that go. This is why they try to talk about the so-called voodooism. They try to demonize Haitian people. They try to humiliate them. They try to put them on a lower level, with respect to civilization. When in actuality, if it wasn't for the Haitian people, most of the people of Latin America would not be free, because Haitians, after their revolution, they actually supported them with logistics, with weapons, a lot of the Latin American nations who were vying for liberation. And they actually stated that any African who was enslaved, if they came to Haiti, they would be a free man or a free woman. They would be freedmen. So Haiti was actually the one who abolished slavery even before the United States. When these idiots, when these wignats, when these fairies like Fairy Fuentes, these white supremacist gays, they try to act as if white countries were the ones who abolished slavery. The first abolitionists were the indigenous Africans who resisted enslavement on the continent, right? From the European slavers and the various elites that they cooperated and collaborated with, who represented like 0.01% of the population, the tips of the world. The indigenous Africans who resisted this, they would have been the first abolitionists. Almami Abdul Qadir Khan and Futa Toro in the 18th century. These, Fulani Senegambian and West African Muslims in Senegambia, they were resisting the cotton plantations that Britain wanted to impose on, West Africa. And from that movement, from the Almami movement, the European abolitionist movement sprang, right? And it would be 100 years later that America, through the Civil War that was largely participated in by black soldiers, abolished slavery. So Haiti plays a very important role with that. One of the heroes of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and he actually modeled the uniform of the president of the UNIA after Dessalines' uniform. And Haiti plays an important role in being a beacon for black liberation all across the planet. And this is why they can never let Haiti go. Another reason is that Haiti, the technology that Haiti was able to create literally debunks all of the talking points that Nick Fuentes is about to make. Completely debunk it. Completely. So I'm going to show you this. This is Sanssouci. Sanssouci is a fortress created by the Haitian people based off of indigenous African architecture. According to the Haitian people, this is architecture rooted in the Carthaginian civilization, the ancient Kemetic civilization, and the Haitians who descended from some of these populations through the slave trade had learned some of these traditions. Right now, Nick Fuentes is claiming that Haitians and Africans weren't developed, but the Haitians had the architectural traditions to understand how to create multi-story buildings. They had the architectural traditions, to understand how to develop military installations to resist the enslavement process and to resist the enslavement by Europeans. So Nick Fuentes is claiming that Haitians and Africans were not developed when they were met with Europeans. But history shows you that in the 18th century, enslaved Africans in Haiti had the engineering prowess to build a multi-story military installation and fortress against the enslavement of their people by the Europeans. So, I don't expect Fairy Fuentes to know that much about military history. I don't expect him to know about architectural and engineering history, especially as it relates to African people. And I don't expect Candace and other black conservative grifters to be able to know this either. They're actually very, very foolish. And I'm gonna let them play. Let's see what
Look
he has to say.
into, and I'm pleading ignorant, but I've heard some things about what happened in Haiti and what the Clinton Foundation did there. So I think I'd have to look more into the history of Haiti to be able to push back on that at all. I don't think I agree with that.
What about all of Africa then? There's not one country in
And
sub-Saharan.
again, and this is another tactic. This is another tactic that they do. They literally blame it on the Democrats. So, Fairy Fuentes and Candace, when it comes to the Democrats and white people doing wrong, if it's liberals and Democrats, all of a sudden they accept it. So he had no pushback when she spoke about the manipulation that is documented by Republicans and right-wingers themselves against Haiti. She literally pointed out, and she did a terrible job, but she literally pointed out how the Democrats, the white Democrats, stole billions from Haiti in aid. And they manipulated the Haitian people after the big hurricane. They manipulated the people. They took their jobs. They took billions in their name. They took mining concessions from Haiti. And by the way, Haiti is ran by a lot of the same people, these Lebanese and, West Asians of the Judaic faith, these are some of the same people that Nick Fuentes blames all the problems in white society on. But all of a sudden, when it has to do with black people, it's black people's fault. But when it has to do with white people, you can blame the Jews, right? You can literally, they've done more, the people who Nick complains about, these white so-called Jews, they've done more against Haiti than they've ever done against white people, than they've ever done against Europeans. But, he chooses not to accept it. He chooses to change the subject. Watch him. Watch this bait and switch. Watch him change the subject completely and try to move over blaming another African population.
To be able to push back on that at all. I don't think I agree with that.
What about all of Africa then? There's not one country in sub-Saharan Africa that's successful. Not one. They're all least developed countries. They're all failed states.
See, and again, Ferry Fuentes is unfamiliar with a lot of the modern, white talking points. A lot of these white folks like to dance with classical liberalism. They like to dance with these subject matters. One hand, if you look at South Africa or Azania, it is definitely developed in terms of the modern definition of development as a full nation of BRICS. Now, Ferry Fuentes would probably like to blame all of this on the Boer, as he would maybe claim that white people in South Africa are being oppressed by so-called black economic empowerment, where black workers are actually seizing the means of production of the actual industries that they helped create over the past, century. Local people actually taking control of their own industries and their own development. He would call that racism against white people. But again, a lot of these white right-wingers, they look at Botswana and they look at the rapid development of Botswana and they claim that that is due to capitalism. And they try to juxtapose Botswana against Zimbabwe, which is also a capitalist nation, through and through. But because Zimbabwe had a very, very harsh standard against the white farmers, a very, very tough militant approach with state machinery to take the land owned by the apartheid holders. Because of that, a lot of these white conservatives within their consciousness, they consider Zimbabwe as a socialist antagonist within the history of Africa. And they prize Botswana. Botswana is in so-called sub-Saharan Africa. Botswana, who has benefited immensely from the diamond wealth, right? So typically, when white conservatives are looking at examples of African nations who have done well versus African nations who haven't, they split that among the socialist and capitalist dichotomy. But again, I don't expect Ferry Fuentes to be able to have that type of knowledge. I don't expect him to be able to know any of this information at all whatsoever. So, this is really, really clear. Now, right here, I have, if you look at on the screen, this is a map of the different human development index on the African continent, basically refuting what Nick said. If you look at Gabon in Central Africa, they're higher on the end when it comes to human development index. If you look at Botswana, as I stated before, right, they're higher on the index. And then you have nations like Kenya, who are also very, very high on the index. Nations like Ghana, right, who are also high on the index. So as you can see, this is an example of some of the propaganda, just exposing some of the lies of individuals like Fuentes, individuals who are very, very horrendous with their analysis. And that was Cote d'Ivoire. So it's Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, but they're neighbors, right? They are higher in terms of the Human Development Index, in terms of the rapid growing economies, right? And this was in 2020. You're bound to see a lot of development occurring within the Sahel states with respect to this index as well. So the idea that African economies are not growing, a lot of this growing is despite sanctions and despite economic policies of the West, right? Despite these different deals that are being made, against the growth, against the development of technology in Africa, because the Europeans want Africa to be a dumping ground, for their technologies. A lot of these different metrics like HDI and GDP and GNP, we have to take with an ocean of salt, because these mark how integrated we are as African people into the Western economic structure. Some of the same structures that, Ferry Fuentes likes to complain about because it's owned by the Jews, so-called, so to speak, right? So again, his idea that no African nations are developing is absolutely foolish.
Kind of reminds me, and we could kind of flesh out this conversation together, and I'm not perhaps ready to have it fully, but I do remember going back to Dave Smith.
Yeah, when she says she's not ready to have it fully, she doesn't want to upset her white nationalist audience, her white incel audience. She doesn't want to upset them.
Was conceding a point on, well, all of these other Middle Eastern countries, no, you wouldn't want to live there, you want to live in Israel. Now in mind, I'm going, well, could you just keep bombing the crap out of them if they ever try to get ahead? I remember watching this with him saying that, going, why don't these countries get ahead? And kind of going back in my mind to the Gaddafi speech where he keeps speaking essentially about, here's what we got to do in Libya to get ahead, here's what we're going to do with the dollar, and we're going to be progressive and this and that. And they killed him. And then what happened to those Libyan refugees? Suddenly they're now pouring.
Which is a fact. Again, he has nothing to say to this because it was Clinton who was over Benghazi. When they can blame it on white Democrats and white liberals, he has nothing to say in defense of white people because those are his political enemies. So Candace right here, when she's talking about what happened to Libya, what Hillary Clinton under the Obama administration, as she was Secretary of State, what she did to Libya in the bombing of Benghazi, that was white people against an African nation. That was the white Clintons, the white Democrats against black people, against an African nation. He has nothing to say about this. And many of these Democrats are Catholics, like Pelosi, like Joe Biden. They're part of his same church. He has nothing to say when Candace Owens pushes the blame on white Democrats, on these white liberals. Nothing to say whatsoever.
Just like he said was going to happen, that they're now pouring into the European continent and Europeans are complaining, who are these people? And so the question is, are we allowing, because I'm like, Africa's a pretty rich country. Like, why aren't Africans controlling the diamond trade? Who's taking all of the diamonds so that they can't control the diamond trade? And how long have these people been doing that, being essentially culture vultures? That's kind of the journey that I've been now.
And look at this again. She literally points to the fact that the imperialists, the specific instance that she mentioned was white people, white Democrats, white liberals and the Clintons. They cause imperialism in these countries. They bomb these countries. And where do the people in these countries go? They immigrate. The Somalians, the Congolese, the Sudanese, these different Africans, the Yemenis, some of the different people in West Asia. They go to Europe. They go to these white Western countries that are bombing them. Canada, the United States, all over the European, subcontinent, Australia, etc. He has nothing to say when she points out why there's immigration to Europe because of the actions of white nations, of white leaders. They are creating the problem, the very problem that they complain about, that they constantly complain about. She pointed that out. What does Ferry Fuentes have to say? Nothing. And Candace is such a grifter, she's such a token that she can't slam Ferry. If she gets Ferry Fuentes, her followers will be angry with her. So she can only go so far. She can't go all the way to expose the hypocrisy of Ferry Fuentes. She can't connect the dots and really chop them up. She's not allowed to do that because she serves a white audience. She's not allowed to go forward with the truth because she serves a racist, white nationalist, incel audience.
In terms of really trying to go back and look into history to see what's happened. Mm-hmm. And I never trust myself when I have a perspective now because I realize how much of my opinions and beliefs were shaped by the public school system. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think you're right. I think that there has been a very sophisticated effort to, just like you would say now, in terms of people that are intentionally attacking Anglo-Saxons. I'm just learning about that there were these books that were written to, we must genocide the Anglo-Saxons that were going on for a lot longer than I realized. History didn't begin with World War II, but I think it would take a lot of time to kind of unpack that.
Yeah.
Like, are we stopping people from getting ahead just because?
And again, he doesn't address anything that she says. He will not address a word that she says.
That just sounds, being honest with you, that just sounds to me like a left-wing argument when they say, why don't these countries get ahead? Colonialism, you're a colonizer. It's like, okay, but when we got there, they had no development. We got to.
Yeah, that's an ad hominem attack. It's calling it a left-wing argument. And as I said, Ferry is going against the history of his own church. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into all of the different claims that he's making, all of the different, fraudulent, talking points that he's making.
Africa, they had no technological development.
So you think that even if we weren't at war, and sure, you could say that you think that's a leftist argument. I would only push back on that because I've learned so much about just like recent history that I didn't know. But you think that the Middle East, like if we had done nothing in terms of the Middle East, that they would just be savages and just be like, America didn't do anything he doesn't set anything backwards. You're just like bombing a place.
Yeah, kind of. I think.
Yeah, algebra came from the so-called West Asia, from the Islamic states. The Moors, these are African Muslims. They're the ones who civilized Europeans in the Dark Ages because they translated a lot of the Greek texts into Arabic and they used that to develop their society. So without so-called, these West Asians, without these Islamic cultures, Europe would not have its architecture, it would not have its modern infrastructure, it would not be able to read, they wouldn't have toilets. They literally, like the term, piss poor, comes from the people in England who would literally be dwelling in piss. And if you didn't have a pot to piss in, you were so poor that you couldn't collect your piss to tan hide. And this was before the Muslims, the African Muslims, the Moors came in and civilized these Europeans during the Dark Ages. So this is completely fraudulent. Ferry Fuentes is historically illiterate. And Candace is a grifter. Like, she doesn't have the chops. She's not quick enough. She doesn't have the chops to be able to break him down.
We did set them back because when they don't have political order, it prevents development and investment and things like that. But, again, when you look at the antecedents of all these, the history didn't start, like you said, with World War II in the 20th century. There's a reason that European civilization created this enormous gap between them and everybody else. And I don't think it was that it was white supremacy or it was unfair or something like that. I think it's because Europeans are harder.
Yeah, and again, we're gonna break that down, break down the foolishness of Ferry Fuentes, just his inadequacy when it comes to his historical integrity. His own church, his church and the church that Candace attend, the Catholic Church, doesn't even agree with him. Their own church doesn't even agree with them, and we're gonna break that down. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to Pan African Designs and Apparel. Shout out to Lee Clinton. We're about to go in, and I'm going to show y'all why, this idiot, Ferry Fuentes, and grifters like Candace Owens are ill-equipped when it comes to African history and African development. So, when it comes to the Catholic Church itself, St. Athanasius was called Athanasius the Black by his contemporaries. He had very, very dark skin. He incorporated ancient African wisdom and emanationism in his articulation of the Trinity, particularly the 39th festal letter. Ferry Fuentes doesn't know about this. Candace, she's only been Catholic for like 2 days, so she has no idea about this. But Athanasius, he was a Kemetic patriarch of the church, of the early church. He was a theologian, right? In 367 CE, he instituted the scriptural canon for all Christianity in his 39th festal letter to the church, right? He served as the bishop of Rakoti or Alexandria for 45 years, from 328 until his death in 373, right? And he used Platinian metaphysics to articulate the Trinity as an emanation from the One, right? And he used ancient African, ancient Kemetic wisdom to articulate his understanding of the Trinity. This is very, very clear, to those who are familiar with the history of the Catholic Church, as somebody who grew up in that church. These grifters, Ferry Fuentes and Candace Owens, they don't know anything about it. They're just coming on to spew talking points for their audience, for their right-wing incel wignat audience. Their audience, that they're blacked, fetishizing audience. So then you have Saint Clement of Alexandria. Saint Clement of Alexandria, Candace and Ferry Fuentes, they claim to say, or primarily Ferry, he claims that Africa did not have writing before Europeans. The father of his own church, Saint Clement of Alexandria, completely disagrees with that. Saint Clement of Alexandria spoke about the significance of African writing systems like the Medu Neter. He recognized them as elements of ancient wisdom to be studied by all Christians. Saint Clement of Alexandria, Rakoti, Alexandria in Egypt, the first center of Christian theology, an African city. It wasn't in Europe that Christian theology was developed. It was in Africa, building on ancient Kemetic wisdom. Saint Clement of Alexandria, he literally stated that African writing systems, like the Medu Neter, were elements of ancient wisdom to be studied by all Christians. In his Stromata, book 4, he literally stated this. So Candace, she just became Catholic. Ferry Fuentes is like 3 years old, so he's not really old enough to know about, the history of the church that he attends. He just takes communion like an idiot, doesn't even know what it means, doesn't even know that's Asarian divination, the body and blood of Asar, right? And the Mariology of the Catholic Church is literally borrowed from the Isis divination of the Roman period. He doesn't know about any of this. He's probably not even experienced to know about a lot of the distinctions and the debates that Protestants and Catholics have with respect to the scripture, sola scriptura, and the 5 solas versus the so-called church tradition. He doesn't know anything about the church tradition. If he did, he wouldn't be making arguments this stupid, that there's no African writing before Europeans, that there's no African architecture before Europeans. The Catholic Church doesn't even claim this at all. Now look, according to the biblical narrative, and this goes to show you that Candace and Ferry Fuentes are not biblically literate, because Nimrod was the first builder of civilization, and according to the biblical narrative, he is a Cushite. He is a descendant of Cush, a descendant of Ham, right? So all of these Christians, all of these Wignat incel Christians who claim that Africa did not have civilization, who claim the Bible as a beacon of Western civilization, they claim that Africans without Europeans did not have writing, did not have multi-story buildings, did not have the wheel. According to the biblical narrative, the Hebraic narrative, Nimrod, a Cushite, a Hamite, was the first builder of civilization. So their own Bible disagrees with them. Their own Bible cuts them completely. It's embarrassing. So when you look at Cosmos Indicopleistes, this is Christian topography. And it comes from the traveler and former merchant Cosmos. And he records monuments and inscriptions he saw at Agilis in Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa. His topography is an eyewitness to late antique accounts of the Red Sea Oskamite regions with monuments and inscriptions. Useful primary evidence for how late Christian travelers described African polities. Right? So again, like when you look at this stuff, early Christians said, yeah, Africans have writing. In East Africa, deep in East Africa, they say Africans have writings. Africans have monuments. These are Christians describing Africa. They are describing the African continent. They are describing the civilizations that they are coming across in Africa, that they are seeing on the continent. They don't make the claim that Ferry Fuentes makes, and they're not as foolish as, Candace when it comes to not even combating a lot of this white supremacist propaganda. Both of them serve red meat to their white supremacist audience. Now, James is asking, what do I think of Marquette the Saint guy? I think he's kind of strange, maybe. Strange is the word that I would use. Never really got into his content. Never really got into his content. I just remember seeing a video where he talked about creating his own religion. All power to him. But to me, he just seemed kind of strange. Now look, according to Augustine, who's one of the fathers of the church, what is now called the Christian religion already existed among the ancients and was not absent in the beginnings of the human race until Christ appeared in the flesh, from which point the true religion received the name of the Christian religion. So Augustine is talking about ancient North African, because he is from North Africa, ancient North African culture, Kemetic divination systems, African culture and civilization, right? He is saying that theology, those practices originated with the ancients, the practices that he called Christianity, a lot of the theology, a lot of the principles, he's admitting that it came from the ancients. This is another father of the Christian church, specifically the Catholic Church, but most Christians consider Augustine of Hippo a father of the faith, African church father, not a European, but an African. Oh yeah, Marquette the Saint, he reminds you of Candace. Yeah, if he's a conservative, conservatives are historically illiterate. They're idiots. They don't know much about history. They parrot, white nationalist talking points. They're just, useless really when it comes to these conversations. Anything having to do with black people, black history, don't count on a conservative. They will bastardize it. They will ruin the representation. And, they're just frauds, ultimately. They're just grifters and frauds. They're basically doing it for a paycheck. They don't really have authenticated beliefs beyond what they believe they can get from the white supremacist or white nationalist society, Western white society. So now moving on to writing, another thing that Ferry Fuentes claims is that Africans did not have writing before Europeans, right? And of course, Ferry's like him, he would deny the fact that the ancient Kemites were black, even though his own Bible, Candace and Ferry's own Bible, the Bible that they use, say that Mitzrayim is a descendant of Ham. Literally, the ancient Egyptians are Hamites, according to the Bible, blacks. They're the ones who, Ferry is the one who would support Dumb Verses by Nicholas V in using Genesis 9:21 and the curse of Canaan to castigate all black people and all the descendants of Africa. But when you look at the Eurasian writing systems, the most popular Eurasian writing systems, most of them came from the Medu Neter. When you look at the Proto-Sinaitic, when you look at the Greek, Latin, Etruscan, all of these glyphs came from the Medu Neter. So most of the modern writing systems on the planet today originated with the Medu Neter. Always remember that. Somebody says that Marquette reminds me of the FBA founder, tried being a pimp. Yeah, Marcus Vincent Thomas and Marquette are very similar. Marcus Vincent Thomas had a better career as like a C-list celebrity. But just the fact that his wife, left him, allegedly, Lexi left him, his career is pretty much done because it's unsustainable for him to be doing what he's doing. I don't know if he still lives in Chatsworth, but it's unsustainable for him to continue his operation. That's why the Hidden Hairline shop is defunct, and everything that he's ever been working on is pretty much a failure. His grift with the Melanoid Nation, his Pan-African, humanist foundation, where he used to basically funnel money, that grift is probably pretty much done. So yeah, shout out to James. Yeah, you can literally see from modern Hebrew, Greek, Latin. Ferry Fuentes, Africans didn't have writing before Europeans, and Candace just lets him say this stuff. Literally, the letters, the scripts that you type with on your computers, these descend from the Medu Neter. Shout out to the King's Monologue. King's Monologue shows you how the Medu Neter, or according to the Bible, Hamites gave the world their letters. Right? Black people gave the world their letters, and you can see even the Brahmi script. The Brahmi script has letters from the Medu Neter, even though some of the Indus Valley scripts, came into that as well. But the scripts of India are a combination of the ancient Indus Kushite systems with the Kemetic system, the Kushite Kemetic writing script, right? So all of the letters on the planet have African, all of the most prominent letters and cultures on the planet in Asia and Africa and Europe, they have African origins, right? The one thing that you can't see here is the African variants of this, the African script, the inner African scripts. You don't really see many of those, but those can definitely be made or represented. I'm looking for the Punic here. The Punic should be somewhere here. It may not be. But yeah, all of these scripts, again, even Norse, the so-called Viking script has an African origin. So now we're getting into scholars. And again, Ferry Fuentes and Candace, they're not even up to date with white scholarship. This is what white people who study language and literatures have to say about Africa and whether or not Africa had writing before Europeans. According to David Dalvey, there are numerous indigenous writing systems, the Bamum or the Akauku in Western Cameroon, the Ntibiri in Nigeria. his research on this, and you can see the Akauku here on this A right here. This is so-called Bamum letters on this A right here in Western Cameroon. Africa has a long tradition of writing, a long established literate tradition prior to and before Europeans. But we just used it differently. We use it administratively. We didn't really have it in everyday literature or an everyday experience. And Baba Banachi Montgomery, he explained this in his last video. Shout out to Sanjeti and Jenamonk for interviewing him. But he literally broke down how writing makes it dead. When you write something down, it's dead. Whereas in oral narratives, things are more dynamic and live and living. So that's kind of why we use oral history more than we did writing. But that doesn't mean we didn't have writing in secret societies, and again, according to administrative and governmental tasks. That has to be understood, right? Because it's not like the idea that these idiots have that Africans didn't have writing. If Africans didn't have writing, nobody would have writing. Because as I stated before, the writing systems that we have are literally the descendant of African writing. Then you have Henry Lotte. He's a French ethnographer, white, and he's an archaeologist. This white French ethnographer and archaeologist, best known for his work on the Tassili rock art, where he documented numerous petroglyphs, rock art writing that depict chariots in wheeled transport. Now, a lot of idiots will try to play the Saharan, super-Saharan, infra-Saharan game, but most of the ancestors of West and Central Africans during the Holocene, the mid-Holocene, were in the Sahara, right? They were in the Sahara, and these Tassili rock arts depict black people, right? So even according to the conventional Africanist Greenbergian model, the Niger-Saharan or Congo-Saharan model, the majority of the ancestors of West and Central Africans were in the Ibero-Mauritian civilization before migrating south and becoming the Kifians and the Tsanarians. And again, this study by white people, white scholars who study this Saharan zone where they see black people, see wheels, wheeled transport. They see the wheels all throughout the Sahara. Right now, this is a Catholic for Ferry Fuentes and Candace, and Henry Edouard Prosper. He was a Catholic priest and a pioneering prehistorian who studied African rock art, including Saharan cave paintings. And he highlighted their importance in understanding early symbolic and technological practices. This slide right here is where you can see wheeled vehicles in the Sahara. You see these vehicles, right? The ancestors of modern West and Central Africans had this technology. It's very, very clear. Very, very clear. And some of the roads that they use to ride across the Sahara are still in existence today, right? So again, this is a white Catholic scholar who studied African history and concluded that yes, Africans had technology. Yes, they had writing in the form of petroglyphs on the Saharan wall. And a lot of the lies of Ferry Fuentes and Candace are just complete, misapprehensions, fraud, lies. It's embarrassing. It's really, really, really embarrassing. Now we have Gertrude Catton Thompson, and she was an English archaeologist who proved through her excavations that Great Zimbabwe was built by native African peoples, countering the colonial myth that it was of foreign origin. That is a complete lie. That is a complete falsehood. It's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. She looked at multi-story buildings, multi-story architecture, and she concluded that no, it was not so-called Eurasians. These were built by Africans. And many of her colleagues, in the West were really upset with her when she did that. And again, that's going to be for James, that's going to be the mid-Holocene period. You have different periods of the Sahel. You have the Bubaline period, the horse period, the camel period. So that's going to be in between the horse and the camel period of Saharan history, with like mid-Holocene. You're talking about like 8 to 5,000 years ago, so to speak. So yeah, that's going to be around the period that you see some of this Tassili rock art and some of these chariots within the Sahara, right? So yeah, moving on. Now you have Chris Ehret, rest in peace, passed away in March earlier this year. And he wrote extensively on, African technology, including writing, architecture, and transport. And he emphasized East African, according to the Greenbergian model, these Cushitic type people. He emphasized the role that they played into the development of wheeled transport. If it wasn't for donkeys, there wouldn't be wheeled transport, right? And what East Africans played a prominent role in the domestication of Equus africanus, or the African donkey, right? Equus asinus africanus in many other taxonomic definitions. And because of their domestication of the donkey, this played the framework for wheeled transport to be able to be developed. And you can see here an ancient, African potter from the Old Kingdom, using the wheel as technology. You see a chariot of the pharaoh here, and you see the domestication of donkeys up here, right? So literally, Africans had wheel technologies. Africans used wheel technologies. Africans played a prominent role in the domestication practices, the pastoral technological practices needed to be able to, develop these wheeled vehicles. James is saying, you think they changed the dating of the Zimbabwe structures? That'd be interesting. Do you know what date that they changed it to, what it was revised to? That'd be interesting to know. So again, Chris Ehret, white scholar, literally debunks Fuentes and Candace in articulating the extensive evidence of African technological history and writing and civilization. So, at this point, like if you're listening to these frauds, like really, you are getting severely diseducated. Not only miseducated, technological, but diseducated. Severely diseducated. Because again, like they're just showing, Fairy Fuentes is just a complete, he's just useless. And Candace, she can't fight back because not only does she not know, but she's serving again a white nationalist audience. So we're about to get into it. We're about to get into it again. We're about to get into this. Yeah, it was definitely just content for her. It was definitely, just something that she could use to get some content. And if you're liking the show, hit the Cash App. It's $Conjiverse. Really appreciate all the support. This is gonna be, this a late night roast session. I had to do a late night roast session because I kept seeing these videos and like it was really annoying me. Damn. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Late night roast. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. I'm gonna go get a quick drink of water, and I'm gonna be right back. Hey, shout out to Izdahar Muhammad Product. Thank you for giving me something to listen to while I sleep. I appreciate you, fam. Shout out to everybody, I think in Europe, listening in the early morning. I'm on the West Coast. in the U.S., so it's like about to be night over here. Shout out to everybody in the building, all the love and support. We about to get this back going on again. You're saying it's 12:41 a.m. where I am. He must be on the East Coast. Yeah, that's the Eastern Standard Time. They gave it an AD dating. I don't trust it. Great Zimbabwe. I mean, to my knowledge, Great Zimbabwe was AD. You know, I may be wrong about that, but I always picture Great Zimbabwe as AD. You know, but it could be earlier. It could definitely be earlier for sure. So again, now we got Kevin McDonald. And Kevin McDonald, he studies West Africa and the Sahara during the Holocene with special emphasis on early urbanism, writing traditions, architecture, and material culture, including evidence of wheeled chariot vehicles in Saharan archaeology, right? So you can clearly see like these chariots up here, right? You can clearly see it. You know, you could clearly see that ancient Saharans, ancient West Africans had chariots, had the wheel. I mean, this is obvious. This is obvious. You could clearly see it. You could clearly see it. So, you know, this is something that we have to continue to harp on, and we have to continue to just expose the idea that West Africans didn't have technologies. They definitely used, you know, they definitely used riverine transport more, right? But, you know, they definitely also had these technologies. I mean, the pastoral period would be 7,200 years ago to 3,000 years before present. So that's 5,200 BC to about 1,000 BC is where you have the pastoral period, right? And then about 3,200 BC, or sorry, 1,200 BC or 3,200 years ago is where you see the horse period. And then you see the camel period about 3,000 to 2,000 years ago, right? Which is the final period of rock art. But throughout the Sahara, you see Africans using these different technologies, right? So it's clear and obvious that, you know, a lot of these grifters are useless. They are, you know, they're just here to make a buck. You know, they're trying to make money off of racist, you know, off of the influence, you know, the way that they can influence and they could spark up the ire of a lot of these racists. And really, they're not to be taken seriously. So again, this is the Tichit architecture from West Africa built by the Kakoro people. This is an example of multi-storied African architecture prior to Europeans. You have some more Tichit architecture here. This is the area of Mauritania, the Haute Depression in Mauritania. And again, multi-storied architecture before Europeans, right? African people had multi-storied architecture before Europeans. It's clear. Very, very clear. Now you have the Batamaliba Takieta. This is in Togo, Burkina Faso, in that region. And you can see another instance of traditional multi-story architecture in Africa, right? Environmentally sustainable. Clay bricks, adobe bricks, thatched roof. It's clear, right? Clear indigenous multi-storied architecture. So, Ferry Fuentes claimed that African people didn't have multi-storied buildings, didn't have infrastructure, didn't have development prior to Europeans. This is a clear indication. This is a clear example that that is false. That is absolutely false. Look at the size of this. You see these children in that picture on the bottom? This is like damn near 3 stories of a kid's size, and then 2 stories maybe of an adult size. You can literally see the size. You have 1, 2, and even an attic. You can literally see an attic right there in the roof, in the top left. So this is foolish. Tiche was not necessarily before Kemet. It was about like Middle Kingdom type era, Those were the Kakoro people, according to the Soninke, the diminutive people who existed within the region before the Soninke arrived there. That's who they were, the Kakoro. And the Batsamaliba, they're the ones who built the Tatasomba or the Takiera, right? So then you have the Great Mosque of Djen in Mali. And this is an example of multi-story traditional African architecture, Sudano-Sahelian architecture. Nick Fuentes is saying this didn't exist before Europeans. This is a clear example of that's false. And again, Candace doesn't know this. She's not intelligent enough to know this. She doesn't know about the architectural history of Africa. So, this is a layup. This is really easy to display. This is really, really easy to show. So then you have, this is the last representation that I have here. This is Paul Gerdes, and he highlights African writing through Lusona, a system of ideograms used as mnemonic devices to record proverbs, fables, games, riddles, animals, and to transmit knowledge. It originated in eastern Angola, northwestern Zambia, and nearby areas of the DRC. Lusona also carries deep mathematical significance. And again, all these sources are for Europeans. So Nick Fuentes, so-called white nationalist, is not even familiar with the up-to-date European scholarship at all. At all, right? So Gerdes, Kevin McDonald, Canton, Eretz, Dalby, these white scholars, one of them Catholic, right, admitted, and this is in Father Henry Prosper, as a Catholic, he admitted that there was writing, there was civilization, there was architecture. Africans had these things prior to Europeans. We had writing prior to Europeans. All of these things existed, right? So, it's a lie. Africa is actually the founding of civilization, of human civilization. This is what most scholars accept. And, just for Ferry Fuentes to come on and spew that propaganda, and Candace to not even be able to challenge him, it's just embarrassing. It's just absolutely embarrassing. And, it just speaks to their fraudulence, really, because Candace isn't conserving anything other than Whig nationalism, white nationalism. And Ferry Fuentes is just an attention whore. He's an attention whore. So, that's really all I got for this. It's really, really clear, that these guys are frauds. Black conservatives are tokens. They're degenerates. And, they have to be exposed and deposed. That's really the only solution. They need to be made fun of, roasted, because they really have no place when they're spreading this anti-black propaganda. No place whatsoever. So if anybody has anything they else want to add, feel free to send, a super chat. If I get a few, maybe I'll open up the call lines. But if not, I'll close the show out in about maybe give it 2 to 5 minutes. But it appears that y'all are having a conversation in the chat about, Great Zimbabwe. We had a wide variety of writing in mnemonic devices. Absolutely smelly. Definitely. So why are middle-aged Europeans the benchmark? They really shouldn't be. Because Europeans, they actually lived in grass. They talk about African mud huts, but Europeans lived in grass huts. They did not have, extensive architecture like that at all. At all. They lived in grass and sticks or sod houses. This is an example. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna show y'all this. I'm gonna show y'all an example. And this is as early as the 18th or as late as the 18th century. They were living like this. See if y'all can see that. Y'all can see the sod houses, like literally mud houses in grass, like grass mounds, right? And look, no mistake, it definitely was probably, really comfortable, really environmentally sufficient. But when they talk about living in mud huts, and they were living in this as late as the 18th century, like they really ain't got nothing to say. They really don't have anything to say, insulting the architectural traditions of the world when their traditions are nothing, nothing special, nothing to write home about at all. So that it needs to be known architecturally, that Africa really is a beacon of architectural brilliance. If you talk about the history of African architecture, Africa is the beacon of that, of the most diverse architectural traditions in the world, the most robust architectural traditions in the world. And it's really marketing and media, right? Marketing and media is really how we, correct the image with respect to African architectural traditions. Because if we don't take this out of the glance of the West, right? If we don't remove this, from Westerners and Westerners who have no, ambition or incentive to be able to display us accurately, to display our culture accurately, our media has to be removed from their grasp. Shout out to Lee Clinton. Would it be safe to say that Greeks and Romans were civilized by Africans? No, yeah, absolutely. I would say it would be safe to say that. I would say that in most instances, that was the case. And there's actually a text that speaks to this. I mean, African Origin of Civilization by Cheikh Anta Diop definitely speaks to the fact that Europeans were civilized by Africans. But there's many authors who have written about, ancient Kemetic origins of Greek architecture, especially if you look at the colonnade, right? The colonnade is actually Kemetic in origin. The Greeks, in their, classical architectural traditions, you can literally see how the ancient Kemetic colonnade, carried over into the Greek architecture, right? There's an image that I want to show y'all of this, of some of the similarities that you could see. Shout out to everybody in the chat for the support. Y'all could see this. You could see the Kemetic column on the left and then the Greek column on the right, right? You could literally see this. So this is just one example of the way that the ancient Greeks borrowed African architecture, and they borrowed African traditions. It's just one of many different examples. One of many different examples. There's a lot of them, actually. There's a whole host of them.
In this country.
A whole host of them. A whole host of examples. A whole host of examples of this happened. I'm trying to look for a scholar who I know wrote about this extensively. And his name is David Supple, and he wrote a book about classical architecture's African roots, right? So this is a book that you can get on Amazon. It's a book that you can get, on different sources, and right, and it basically speaks about just the different origin, like the different African elements of ancient Greek architecture. And I'm going to show the image. I'm going to show y'all the image of what the book looks like. And if you're interested in, again, another white scholar who speaks about this stuff, you could get this book, Classical Architecture's African Roots. So I'm going to see if it has the author. Yeah, this is the book here. Does it have it? Okay. Yeah, I want y'all to see the author. There it is. David Munez Supple. This is his book, and he speaks about just the African origin of classical architecture, the architecture that Ferry would enjoy, Candace would enjoy, right? So that would explain Europeans falling into backwardness after the Romans declined. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And shout out to Lead for the 5. No, absolutely. Because without a connection, right, to the different sources of infrastructure and development, they really had nothing to fall back on, really, right? So once the Romans left, like Cicero, one of the Roman leaders, he said the British people were so stupid they wouldn't even make good slaves. The indigenous white folk of the British Isles, he said that they were so stupid they wouldn't even make good slaves. And when you look at the recent 7th century, remains showing West African affinities in medieval England, the Ivory Bangle lady, Africans in the Roman Empire came and civilized the UK and developed the UK. So again, a lot of the history that they show is completely flipped. It's completely, reversed. That's not really the way that it's supposed to be. They lie, they manipulate, they sow seeds of dissension, they sow chaos. We have to oppose their propaganda. And this is another thing I want to show y'all. This is another thing I want to show y'all that's also really, really important. This right here is a map of all of the different wars that have occurred in the world, in world history. Look at the amount of wars in the past 4,000 years that have occurred in Europe. Ferry Fuentes was saying that, it was the African people. It's the African people who always fights. And Candace had nothing to respond to that. If you look at the history of war, Europeans only started to develop when they developed war industries to genocide entire continents of people. When they exported their interior war technology to the rest of the planet. That is the way that Europeans gained so-called supremacy or hegemony. It didn't really have much to do with intelligence as much as it had to do with destruction and weapons of war, be it medical warfare or physical warfare. If you look at the wars in Europe recorded, it clearly shows that they are the most violent and the most, opposed to civilizational standards. That is not an African problem. That is not a black problem. That is a problem that comes from Europeans, the Westerners, Yamnaya descendants. This is just, it's just amazing the way that these grifters twist. It's amazing that the way that these grifters twist history, right? It's amazing that because they don't want to expose how violent that they are in comparison. They don't want to expose their historical crimes. Europe was built off of the back of the world. That's facts, right? They're unwilling to expose the nature of their crimes. And this is why we have to do the exposing for them. So when you look at these wars, it's clear that this was an export of military fervor across the planet, right? This was an export of military fervor. And there are plenty of instances. Like even if you look at, Europeans claim that they have the most advanced technologies, right? But if you look at some of the Ming Dynasty ships compared to European ships, look at this example. Look at this European ship compared to the Ming Dynasty ship. It's obvious. It's obvious that they are grifters. It's clear. It's clear that they're grifters. It's clear that they're lying about their technological prowess. It's abundantly clear. Abundantly clear. So again, like I said, we cannot trust them. We cannot, accept automatically that they're going to give us a fair shake. And yeah, they are very proud of what the Yamanaya did. Definitely. Definitely very, very proud of just the trauma that they inflicted on the planet. And it just goes to show you that their culture was built around warfare. Their culture was built around conflict. It was built around, fighting others, fighting the other. It's just clear. It's just clear that their propaganda has to be sniffed out. We can see it. We should be able to see it from a mile away. It has to be sniffed out. It has to be, sorted out. It's not something that we should ever accept, point blank period. Right. And again, going back to what not this one. This is another document I wanted to read. Also, no, this is assassination. I wanted to get into some of the assassinations so y'all can see like all of the different leaders that France assassinated. Every time Africa tried to rise, France assassinated. This is a list of all the leaders. Yeah, they were both running a play. I mean, Ferry is just historically useless, so he's just promoting racist talking points. But Candace was really just ill-equipped again. So we have Sylvanus Olympio, president of Togo, 1963. John Oguyi Ironsi, president of Nigeria, 1966. Ali Sharmaiki of Somalia, 1969. Kurumi of Zanzibar, 1972. Ratsmandarava of Madagascar, 1975. Tombol Bey of Chad, 1975. Mortula Muhammad of Nigeria, 1976. Ngwabi of Congo-Brazzaville, 1977. Bante of Ethiopia, 1977. Sadat of Egypt, Anwar Sadat in 81. Tolbert of Liberia, 1981. Sankara of Burkina Faso in 87. Ahmed Abdallah of the Comoros in 89. Kanyon Do of Liberia in 89. Boudiaf of Algeria in 92. Dadaye of Burundi in 1993. Ntari Nyamia of Burundi in 1994. Habyarimana, shout out to Slick Willie, aka Bill Clinton, in 1994 of Rwanda. Manasara of Niger in 1999. Kabila of Congo-Kinshasa or DRC in 2001. Vieira of Guinea-Bissau in 2009. And Gaddafi of Libya in 2011. So again, this is just a list of different leaders within, African history who were assassinated by France. So when Candace, slightly mentioned that, and she didn't go on to mention that these are white countries attacking black countries, right? And even if it is a so-called left-wing argument, as Ferry was saying, that doesn't make it false. You still have to prove it false. And his idea that Africa was undeveloped when Europeans came is something that's opposed by the Catholic Church itself, the church that he attends itself. especially when they were spreading the gospel, as they call it, to Congo. They encountered the Congo Kingdom. I mean, come on. Come on. I mean, this is too easy. This is too easy. So we're going to get into the bell curve. I'm going to read this. And if nobody has anything, I'm going to read this, and then we're going to close the show. So this is, just the bell curve, an article about the bell curve. And just the fact that, the bell curve is such a fraudulent work. It was made in response to African origin of civilization. This was a war that was happening, in the 80s and 90s against Africana scholars and Western scholars. And basically what they were trying to do is claim that IQ is unchangeable. And because it's unchangeable, there's no policies that can be given, to ameliorate some of these social disadvantages that people have. Black people have, other people have. So, that is the goal of the bell curve, and this article gets into it, right? So, the idea that IQ is a full measure of human intelligence has been refuted. It's been debunked, right? So, and the idea that race biologically hasn't even been proven. It's more of a social category, a social castigation. And yes, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing shut this down in the 70s, right? So you can see psychometrics in psychometrics being part of this field, right? So, just the idea of this. I don't really feel like reading this whole thing, but maybe we'll read it in another live. But just the idea of the notion of the bell curve is fraudulent. A lot of the tests that they use were on like 16-year-olds in West Africa. So yeah, so like this is really, really, just part and parcel of their propaganda that they use. And again, according to the Bible, Acts 7:22, Moses was learned in all of the ways of the Egyptians, right? So Moses learned from ancient Kemetic wisdom, and Jesus came in fulfillment of the prophecies of Moses. So in many ways, Jesus is coming in the fulfillment of the same prophecies of the Gospels. He said, can you post a link in the chat of the article? Yeah, I actually just closed it, but I'm going to see if I can find it. Right here. Oh, it won't let me. Hold on a sec. Yeah. There it is. Right? No problem. It's more of a game than an exam. Yeah, that's right, Smelly. That's absolutely right. And, I've actually been part and parcel of making a black-centered intelligence test. Some of myself and some other scholars in the Bay Area, we've been working on that. An intelligence test that reflects the full metric of intelligence that black people have. Right? So we've been working on that, and that's something that's coming in the future. Right? So if there's nothing else from anybody, we're about to close out the show. Shout out to everybody who supported and lead Clinton. Shout out to Idzar Mohammed Products. Shout out to everybody in the building. Smelly, Pan-African James, all of the above. Love and appreciate y'all. And with that, we finna play the outro. Peace.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one.
Shut up, you dumb, you sound like a coon. Get out, stay clear of this room. We proud, we black, rich, and forever stay paid. They lies and killing spring from the soil they mislay. Their tales are sham, cooked up by scammers who toil. So shut up, chief X, you're a grifter, spoil. Your bow having drivel like your soul. Coptic verse, their language is liturgical, not to rehearse curse. While Ethiopian and Nubian cops and Cairo so merciful. Drop troops surgical, leaving your myths pitiful.
You act like black folks ain't speaking Remy, give me your idiocy. Runs deep, can't study, can't even see. Bubble brother, hush up before I knock your sugar out. Don't twist our ancestors' lore, I'll butcher your clout.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride take flight.
You claim you came from Baltimore, just more trash on display. I bet the faithful flock was up, dusting your ass away. Into that fat orange cat, you're dumber than a box of rocks. Pushing assimilation is politics that shock like cheap mock.
We spot you for a mile, your act just isn't slick. This is real knowledge, not your kuna logical scholarship. If you scared, you should be watch as I spit. God's flame, no bars, no game. You're done when I put you to shame.
When your twisted lies crumble and your fake talk fades, our united voice echoes, truth never degrades. From the ashes of the sea, our spirit invades. In Kemet's name, your false crown forever cascades.
Rosie aka Amir, the scam's a total disgrace. Spitting away with one jargon at a crooked scheme and pace. You twist words confused, try to carve up a space. A fraud, your fake gospel body you with no base. You try to fool slow blacks with your bogus empty guys, but your clumsy act crumbles under truth piercing eyes. Kemet stands united, no room for your deceitful art. Step aside, false prophet, your lies will break a heart.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light. Kemet unfiltered, let pride take flight.
Unity in Kemet, our truth burns bright. We stand as one, exposing your lies tonight. No scam or false prophet can dim our light.